And so we'll go to questions.
Yeah.
10 minutes or so questions, depending on how much.
Yeah.
Okay, Maurice. Grazie. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to day 2 of the rise of the data-driven economy. Trust you had a good night, and the political junkies among you stayed up to watch the Ryan Biden debate. I didn't, but I understand it was a good one. We had a great conversation yesterday that was sets a high bar for day 2, but I thought that before plunging back into our topic of data-driven growth, that we would sort of pull the angle of vision out, widen it a little bit, and take a look at the Eurozone crisis, which after all is sort of a lowering cloud on the horizon that dampens prospects for data-driven growth or growth of any kind in Europe, and of course could spill over and wreak damage on the American economy if it were to spin out of control right as we're trying to recover. So obviously it's a critically important issue, and we saw some dramatic scenes in Greece this week when Chancellor Merkel went to visit. So it's obviously a consuming passion here in Europe. So we're fortunate to have with us today Dr. Thierry Vissot, who is a special advisor on media and communications to the European Commission here in Rome. He's an economist and a specialist on monetary history, as well as media and communication, which puts him in a great position to tell us what's going to happen to the euro and how the Eurozone can be saved if indeed the situation is that dire. He's been both an academic and now civil servant here in Rome in a dual career, and is the author of many books, the next one of which is called Quo Vadis Euro, which is right on our point here. So, Dr. Vissot, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a bit of time I didn't speak in English, so maybe it will be a little bit frozen. Anyway, I would be quite provocative, and I would say I don't know if we are in a euro crisis. I would say that we are more in a systemic crisis, and not in a European systemic crisis, but in an Occidental systemic crisis. And I would say that the euro crisis, if we can call it like this, and I don't like to call it like this, came from 2 big, enormous errors that Americans gave us. The first one is when the Glass-Steagall Act was suppressed by the end of the years 90s. That is to say that there was no more a separation between retail banking and international banking and monetary and financial activities. And this is one of the main errors which has ever been done in capitalism. And it's an American one. The second error is also an American. It's when George Bush decided to let Lehman Brothers fail. And this was absolutely dramatic, because this is the beginning of probably the biggest crisis we shall ever know. Why so? Because this crisis, this failure of Lehman Brothers, cost to Europe 4,500 billion of euros. Only that failure. Just to give you an idea, this is twice the GDP of UK of 1 year. Twice. And from this cost derived an enormous problem, which is that the states in Europe were obliged to finance their own banks because of all the links which were existing between the banks. If this had not happened, the world system would have collapsed. And this is a present from the Americans. So I said I would be provocative. I'm going to be provocative. So obviously, this is not the only reasons. The other reason is that we are living in a system where credit is the only motor of the economy. And you perfectly know it. Your growth in America is linked to your debt. It's because of credit that you have around 2% growth in America, and we have only 0 point something in Europe. When we speak about the euro crisis, we could not speak about the eurozone only, because if you look to UK, for instance, the situation in UK is much more dramatic than in many of the other countries, and UK is not member of the euro. If you look to Japan, the situation of Japan is extremely bad. If you look to America, your public debt, your deficit of your balance of payments is enormous. So at one point or another, there will be a break. And you are able to do that only because the Chinese are giving you money, lending you money, right? So we are entering in a system where there are going to be enormous tensions all over the world, and where we don't know at all what will happen when China will have a currency which will be a world currency. We are entering into a system. When we made the euro in the years 80, 90, we are thinking about a tripolar world with the dollar, the yen, Deutschmark, or euro. We are not anymore in this kind of situation. The yen is becoming marginal. The dollar is in competition with the euro, because you must know that apart from the economic crisis in Europe, the euro is now the second world currency. It's 30% of the reserves of the central banks, and it's more than 30% of the transactions. So we are in a system where we have a polymorphic crisis. Crisis of energy, crisis of food, crisis of water, crisis of interests, divergent, enormous growth of China, India, Africa, South America, which are all competing with us. So the dilemma in Europe was to say, what do we do? Do we do like the Americans and carry on credits? Or do we try to make something a little bit better, that is to make our public finance, our banks safer? And this is the whole work which is done for the moment. I would absolutely accept the fact that in Europe, it's very complex. It's extremely complex because on many points, European Union has no power, no real power. We have not, like you, a budget which is enough. The European budget is only 1.3% of GDP. Your federal budget is 30%, which means that at the European level, we cannot make a fiscal policy which could be counter-cyclic. We have not yet an economic government. That is to say, all the institutions which do exist are not able to absolutely coordinate the economic policy. We have what we call an ECOFIN, which is a council of economic ministers, economic and finance ministers, but the decisions that they take are not binding in a certain way on all the economies. They are not the tool to oblige really a government to make a certain kind of policy, being fiscal or being on growth or employment, social policy, and so on. All this is not part of the treaty. That is to say that the European Union can give directions, but cannot oblige government to do a certain number of things. So this makes our action extremely long, because everything has to be negotiated so as to arrive to something which is not always binding. The only things which may be binding is when there is a country who asks for money to the European Union. Then we can oblige to take a certain number of measures, and you have seen that in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, in Ireland, in Italy in a lesser measure, but all this can be done. So what is happening? The crisis starting in 2008. I should do a small parenthesis for Greece. Greece is not part of the global crisis in a certain way because they did their own errors. It's clear that they trafficked their accounts. They've got debt which is much bigger than it was. They've got an economy which is based on civil servants. In Greece, more than 30% of the workforce is working for a government body of any kind, with a very low productivity and with a very low activity. Greece has not a very big economy, and they didn't profit of the funds which they received from the European Union to develop structures, enterprises, and so on. So they're in a very difficult situation. We may discuss, and you may ask a question on, is it reasonable to oblige them to do the policies that they are doing for the moment? But this is another question. So to come back to the whole picture, what Europe is doing for 4 years now is to try to put in place what was missing. When we designed, and I say when we because I was part of the process, when we designed the European Economic and Monetary Union, we were thinking about economic and monetary union. And it's clear in the treaty that we wanted a full coordination of the economic policy. This has never been done because the government were not keen at all to do that. Now we know that this is necessary, and there are a certain number of steps which have to be done. And we started to do that. And the European Union worked on 3 different directions. First one was to try to put in place measures that could help the various member states who have problems with their debt, with their public finances. And there were created a fund, which we call the ESM, which is a fund which will have, because it started one day, 500 billion euros that it will be able to give to the countries who need them, or to their banks. Then there was a modification of the policy of the European Central Bank, because one of the main differences between Europe and between the Eurozone, we could say, and between America or UK, is that our central bank has not the right to create money to finance governments. So there is no bailout, as we say. And this is obviously a problem. When in America there is a problem, your Federal Reserve is creating money without any problem to finance a government, even if there were some problems you may remember in your parliament with that 2 years ago. So our European Central Bank is not able to create money for government, but they found a way to finance with respecting the treaty, to finance in a certain way or to avoid too many problems on the secondary markets of bonds. So they created a system which is called OMT, which permits to the European Central Bank to buy on the secondary market bonds from government, which is extremely suppressive on the various governments and may push down the spreads. So the second point. And the third point is to try to reorganize the banking sector and maybe to reintroduce a kind of Glass-Steagall Act, that is to say, to separate the retail activity of banks from their financial activity. And we are putting in place a surveillance system, which is extremely binding, which is operated by the European Central Bank and by another authority, which is called the European Banking Authority, and which are going to survey, following very stringent rules, the banks and be able to intervene in case of something would happen. And the other element of this is obviously to modify all the rules about the balance sheets, about the over-the-counter operation, and so on and so on. And apart from these 3 elements, there are a lot of discussion now to go towards a new form of government, which would oblige to modify the treaty. And now the President of the Commission, José Manuel Barroso, said in his discourse to the European Parliament on the State of the Union that the Commission will propose a federation of nation states by the end of next year. And this is supported by the Germans, by Chancellor Merkel, and this is supported also by many other countries, of which obviously Italy. Now, what will be the content of that federation? What are going to be the new power which are going to be transferred at the level of the European Union? We don't know. But one of the other proposals which is linked to this would be to create a specific budget which would be dedicated to the Eurozone policy and to instruments which would permit to make proactive policy and counter-cyclic policy. So I will stop there. I have already passed my time.
Thank you very much.
So if you have any question,
please, yeah, I want to open it up. I'd love to get some responses to your provocative statements. I see Michael Mandel, PPI's chief economist, is raising his hand. Michael, do you want to get in? Hold on, why don't you take the microphone?
I wanted to thank you first for a very provocative talk. How do you connect up, though, the fact that the U.S. is growing now and that Europe is not? Because wouldn't you think that under your sort of scenario that growth in the U.S. would end up pulling Europe ahead?
Because I'm not sure that the evolution of productivity in America will be enough to push up the world economy. What I think is that our very low growth, and in some countries even the non-growth, let's say, is coming from the fact that we put in place policies which are supposed to have this effect. When you decide to reduce your budget, when you decide to raise the taxes, you cannot expect to have an economic growth after that. So the problem is to say, at what term are we thinking? Are we thinking today, or are we thinking within 2, 3, 5 years? The bet of the Germans, who are leaders in this operation, is to say, we did that in 2004, 2005, 2006. We reduced wages, we reduced spendings, we raised the taxes, and we were able to make structural measures which permitted us to have now a growth, to export, and so on and so on. Obviously, this was extremely easy because at that time, all the other countries were making credit to buy the German goods and services. Now we are in a situation where everybody is taking the same policy, so we have a problem. But this problem may be also a solution. All depends on the resilience of the economies, of the reaction of the citizens. It's clear that the situation in Greece, as we saw, is extremely difficult and cannot last anymore. It cannot. They lost 25% of their GDP in 4 years. They had a negative growth of 7%. They will have a negative growth of 7% in 2012. This is not possible to carry on like this. So something will have to be done. And now we see that the Germans, one of the solutions would be that the Germans push up their internal demand. It seems from the last discourse of Mrs. Merkel yesterday that they are starting to think in this direction.
Well, let me say that this week, Mario Draghi, the European Central Bank chief, said that there are some signs of, some good signs, positive signs, falling labor costs in Spain and Portugal, the rising exports, an end to capital flight, which has been horrendous from Spain. That all suggests, you stress the need for a Central European fiscal authority. That all suggests an analysis that says at least a part of the problem, or a good part of the problem, is located in the uncompetitiveness of Southern European economies.
That's right.
In what respect is the United States responsible for that problem?
No, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There are a lot of problems which have to be resolved, but not only in Europe. Certainly, Spain Italy in a certain way, Greece, need structural reforms to put in place a better country system, I would say, because it's a country system which is not working very well. And Monti knows it. He's trying to modify this country system. I don't know what's happened in Greece, but they will have a lot to do because the situation is much worse than in Italy. So these are specific problems. But you cannot, well, Greece is 2% of the GDP of the EU, so it's not extremely important. It's not Greece which is going to modify the competitiveness of the whole area, right? Spain is a little bit more, but Spain has also a lot of advantages in the new technologies and in new markets. So they may do it, but it's very difficult. And there again, the demand has to grow a little bit if you want to permit to resolve also the budgetary problems. But the big problems is that we have to invest in many directions, and we know that. The European Commission made a strategy up to 2020. We know that, for instance, in energy, we need to spend 1,000 billions to modify the structure of distribution of energy, because we know that we have to decrease our consumption of oil and increase solar, wind, and so on, new energies. But for this, you need infrastructures, and the cost of this is estimated to $1,000 billion. If we were able to do that, obviously the growth would go up in an extreme way. We know that in the new technology, we have to develop also networks, and the cost estimated of this would be 400,000 billions euros, so $600 billion, a little bit more. So we know that we have to do a certain number of things to modify not only the competitiveness of our economy, but also to modify the way we are producing. That is to say, to have a more sustainable growth and to go in other directions that the Americans do not want to follow, for instance. Sustainable economy for them is not really, it's nearly an insult, okay? So we know that we have to resolve problems which are also world problems, not only European problems, and productivity is certainly important, but it's not the most important problems to be resolved.
Do you think Europe has a problem in technological investment in leadership? I mean, we've been talking a lot here in the last day about, you know, the big data boom, wireless, wireless industry, the growth of big data and wireless, and digital commerce of all kinds. You know, is this a structural problem for Europe that it's underinvested in these?
Well, yes, certainly. Specifically in investing in the network of broadbands, for instance. In Italy, there is a strong deficit on this. In other countries, it's going much better, but there are a lot of investment to be done on this clearly. And we know that, I know that you are speaking about data, but in terms of goods and trade, through internet, it represents in Europe 3.5% of the GDP, which is not much. And one of the aim of the European Commission is to arrive by 2020 at 7% minimum. Obviously, there are a lot of problems which are linked to the security and data protection. And yesterday, again, I received a mail from I thought a friend who was saying that he had lost his wallet in Edinburgh and was asking to send money to him. Okay, this kind of things happens more and more. Or people who are phoned and they have to click on something, and every time they click, money is going away. So there is a lot of defiance towards using internet for commercial activities. So there again, we have a lot to do on data protection, security of transactions, and so on, which are legislation which are taken in Europe, but it's not enough. There we need also a cooperation at international level. But when we speak about data protection, this becomes a very big problem with America, with UK, and so on. So there again, we are not in a specific European problem, we are in a global problem.
We spoke a lot yesterday about data regulation and protection.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Folks, any questions for Dr. Vizol? Please, Ed Black.
Yes. Hi, welcome, and thank you very much for being here. Without in any way meaning to downplay the reality of a lot of the economic statistics, I wonder about your opinion of how much of our difficulty, in a way, getting into the problem we have economically, and the difficulty in getting out of it is psychological. You have doubt, you have worry, all the stress on the problems, and it makes customers, consumers uneasy, it makes investors and producers uneasy, holding back, not sure of the future. And that there's a self-fulfilling prophecy of the more you doubt and the more you talk about the problem, even while trying to solve them, nevertheless it creates the focus on how bad things are and how difficult the problems are, and everybody just stays on the sideline unsure.
One of the main problems, I would say, psychological, and it's psychological at another level of the one you were speaking about. With globalization, there have been a lot of modification of the social and economic structures. And many people do consider that the crisis that they are living, that the problems that they are living, that the wage problems they have, unemployment, etc., is coming from that, from this globalization. And you know, in France we say we like to have the church in the middle of the village. And the church is not anymore in the middle of the village, because we don't know who is doing what. And one of the main problems of the people is that you would like to have the church back into the center of the village. That means that they have certain reticence with openness, opening their society, accepting that there are modifications. They have a lot of problems with, let's say, accepting to go worldwide. They want to come back to the old system where there was a nation, where there was a social system, where they knew to who to speak when they had a problem. Now, for instance, who are going to accuse, if you speak about the Greeks, who is the person to who they can say, we don't like what you do? Because it's not even their government who decides. Mm-hmm. It's another one. So democracy is not even working, because they can change their government, the government will be in the same situation, linked. So it will have to do the thing. So this creates a kind of renewal of nationalism, closing the societies, and creating a lot of problems. And obviously, people do not like to have less money, not be able to consume, and so on and so on. So in the same time, you have this problem of nationalism, which is obviously an obstacle, an enormous obstacle to try to resolve the crisis at a global level. And in the same time, they are struggling against their own government. So this creates also a problem for productivity, for passing on the reforms, and so on and so on.
Okay, I think we have time for a final question, Stefan.
So you've talked a lot about the US political economy, about the Greek political economy, some about France right now, but take us more through the Italian political economy, because when I talk to friends here in Rome about what lies ahead, there's great uncertainty whether or to what extent the Monti reforms will hold, or how much longer time he will have, or such a course. And most specifically, the most interesting thing that I was hearing these days was that, yeah, well, we Italians ultimately have a sense, in terms of negotiating with Europe, that we are far bigger than Greece, and if the terms of endearment for reform aren't met the way we want it, then we know that we have the Europeans by the you-know-whats. You know, we're in a much better negotiating position because we can tear the whole thing down. Therefore, we're in a much better negotiating position, and by implication, don't face the same need in terms of making the reforms. I can imagine how your policy answer is, you know, that you don't welcome that, but I'd like to get your odds on the political calculations in this country, also with regard to the political parties wanting to get back into the game and so on, and how you see that play out against the idealized scenario that you have described about the course that the European economy has to take. That one might agree to quite easily, but how about the Italian political economy interfering in that? Thank you.
Well, you have got here a representative of the Ministry of Economic and Finance, I think, just behind you, who would be perhaps more able to answer to the question. I'm French, I'm not Italian, okay? So my opinion is an opinion of a foreigner. Italy is a country of paradox. It's full of paradox. I would say very quickly that the country system is not working very well. And this is extremely important because politics are important. And the system is not very good. There is not, I would say, a sense of public good in Italy at the level of the population and at the level of the politicians, except with the new government who has a different mentality, perhaps because they work a lot outside of Italy, most of them. So the paradox is, first, there is a difficult country system which Monti is trying to modify, reform. Second, there is an economy which is extremely dynamic, with a lot of innovation, even if, since more or less 10 years, not much has been done. There is a decrease in the inventivity of the Italy. There is very low productivity. There have not been enough structural reform to let the economy do better. And I think this is, again, what Monti is doing. Obviously, the counterpart of this is a rise in taxes, is a decrease in the spending of the government, and so on, which should have been done much before, which has been done during the 90s by the government Prodi, but which has not been done after that by the government Berlusconi. So there is a lot to do, but the potential of Italy is extremely high. Highly educated people, good firms, good exportation. In September, for instance, Italy was with a balance of a commercial balance in excedent, the highest excedent for 10 or 15 years, which means that there is a real potential. So if Monti is able not only to pass the reforms that he is preparing for the moment, because not all were voted by the government yet, by the parliament yet. The problem of Italy is to know what is going to happen next year when there will be the election. If there is a Monti II, which is now a possibility, maybe they will overcome the situation. If there is another political organization, we don't know absolutely what's going to happen. And this is also one of the reasons of the spread on Italy, because there were some calculations which were made that more or less 200%, 200 points of the spread were due to the political uncertainty. So this being said, it's clear that Monti, for the moment, has a very big potential to put Italy on the right tracks. And not only this, he has a potential also to play a very bigger role at the European level. Because it's clear that in the last years, the role of Italy decreased at the European level. But now we're in a situation, you know, it's very complex, and I could speak about hours about this, but before there were a kind of tandem between Germany and France, which were pushing on the things. Now France lost a little bit of this power, because since the reunification of Germany, let's say, since the years 2000, since 2004, when the Prime Minister of Germany asked to be member of the Council of Security of the ONU. It's very important. This is a turning point in the way the Germans are seeing their role in Europe. Less cooperative, more dominant, and so on and so on. So in this structure, there is a need for having other governments, which are, with France, trying to re-equilibrate the power system in Europe. And Italy is obviously the partner to do that. So everybody hopes that next year the Italians will be able to take the right decision to go on in this way.
Well, thank you. We've run out of time, but that was a really cogent analysis of the European-wide.
Yeah, 20 minutes is very short
to
give.
To cover the systemic crisis, we are out of time, so we really should move on. What'd you say? One question. All right, sorry.
I wanted to just come back to the original point about the euro crisis. Okay, so do you think, if you're looking ahead out a year at this point, okay, are you worried about the dissolution of the euro, or do you think that that part of the crisis has passed?
I am absolutely not worried about any kind of desperation of the euro. What I'm worried about is how we are going to manage the Greek crisis. This is a real problem. This is a real problem.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Dr. Wiesel for this, as I say, very cogent, if provocative analysis. So I think Stephen, do we need to take a 5-minute break to bring up Paul and a great panel on corporate responsibility and ethical data stewardship coming up next. So thanks again, Doctor.